Looking ahead to the 2023 NFL Draft, will the Louisville Cardinals have any first-round selections? We will answer that here in just a second on this episode of the show. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credentialed media member for Cardinal Sports Zone, where I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time, as always, to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Going to be a little bit of a different episode on this Tuesday edition of the show. Kind of a hypothetical, looking more towards the 2023 NFL Draft and kind of the season in general. Answering the question, will the Louisville Cardinals have any first-round picks in the next draft? 3 names possibly come to mind. That is Caleb Chandler, Malik Cunningham, and Jermayne Lole. We will then transition into identifying 2 under-the-radar NFL draft prospects that could see their stock rise this upcoming season in Ketrel Clark and Yasir Abdullah. And then finally, we will dive into the weekly mailbag segment. But starting out, I wanted to kind of have a segment on this because I saw a Twitter conversation about a week ago. And basically it was posing the question, do the Louisville Cardinals have a first-round pick on their roster currently? And it maybe kind of go down the line and think about it. And I don't think that there's a set-in-stone first-round pick, but I think that there are 3 players that could possibly rise into that conversation. That's Caleb Chandler, Malik Cunningham, and Jermayne Lole. I think Chandler is probably the more likely of the 3 to be a first-round pick, and I'm not saying that as a slight to Cunningham or Lole. I think based upon position, based upon, how the league values certain positions and as it pertains to where they're drafted at. Offensive linemen, a lot of them get drafted later on, but you see the nation's premier offensive linemen going early on. Ikem Ekwonu from NC State going early. You have Evan Neal from Alabama. Zion Johnson went to my Los Angeles Chargers at 17. Trevor Penning also in the mix, going to, I think it was Dallas? No, I'm sorry, New Orleans. And multiple other first-round offensive linemen were taken. So, in my opinion, you look at some of the best offensive linemen in the ACC, Ekwonu, Zion Johnson, so on and so forth. Caleb Chandler was one of the best linemen in the ACC last season. I saw a tweet that had like the top 10 offensive linemen in the conference that were upperclassmen. All of them decided to go to the draft except for Caleb Chandler. All were drafted except for Caleb Chandler because he didn't enter the draft. But Chandler ranked by, I think it's Big Game Sooner or something like that. A lot of people don't put a lot of stock into it, but just for reference, they, whoever it is that runs that account, ranked Caleb Chandler as the second best offensive guard outside of I forget the player's name from Florida. I think it's like Osiris. I could be completely wrong, but the second best guard in the country, and I think that that's kind of something that's a testament to how well he has played. Caleb Chandler, an all ACC caliber player. I think that what he's been able to do it has been essentially incredible. I love the ability to be instrumental in the passing game, but also very, very solid in the rushing department, and that's something that you can't understate. So I think that Caleb Chandler is probably going to be the one out of the 3 that would be most likely to be a first-round pick. Now, to get there, he's obviously got to have a pretty successful 2022 campaign to where he not only replicates the success of last season, but takes it to a next level and does wonders in terms for the Louisville offense. So speaking of the Louisville offense, Malik Cunningham, we discussed it with Jeremy Wallman on the show a couple weeks ago. Cunningham was involved in a mock draft to where he was drafted, I think it was 26th overall to the Seattle Seahawks in the first round. Basically, I think that the rationale behind that is banking on the potential there. Cunningham obviously is one of the most deadly dual threat quarterbacks in all of college football, probably the most deadly dual threat quarterback in the ACC, in my opinion. But also has the potential there with the arm. People think, well, he's 24 years old, or I think he will be 24 years old. Is age going to play a factor? Well, I mean, I guess it possibly could, but Joe Burrow was older than most college quarterbacks, and I know no way am I comparing Joe Burrow to Malik Cunningham or anything like that. But I am saying that 24 years old in the grand scheme of things is not necessarily that old. I mean, you're still looking at maybe a over 10 plus year NFL career. So at the end of the day, I don't necessarily think that this is so much of a he's a little too old for our liking. I think it's more so of a okay, what is his ceiling as a pocket passer? Because we saw last year at Louisville, he took some considerable steps forward, I will say, in the way that he progressed through his reads. Now, early on in the season, it looked like he was playing a little hesitant, double guessing what he was reading, and that led to some errant throws, some blatant underthrows, sailing some overthrows. The deep ball accuracy improved in 2021. Getting the ball to guys like Tyler Harrell, Jordan Watkins, Amari Huggins, Bruce. But I think that where Malik Cunningham excels is kind of in the mid-range, in the intermediate routes, sort of like a Jalen Hurts, to where, if you were looking to draft Malik Cunningham, you would probably use him in the same way that Jalen Hurts is getting used in Philadelphia right now. And what I mean by that is you have a guy that you're utilizing his strengths. You are playing to his strengths, in which you're having some designed run RPOs, allowing him to utilize his legs. But also, when you are throwing the ball, it's more so trying to dominate the intermediate, the over the middle throws, the 10 to 15 yard throws, to where you can move down the field. I think that his deep ball accuracy, like I mentioned, it's starting to get better and better. 2022 is going to be the telltale sign. It is a money year for Malik Cunningham. Is he a first round pick though? I don't think that one mock draft, seeing him land in the first round is the end all be all. But just for a NFL analyst to see Malik Cunningham in that light, kind of opened my eyes a little bit to think, okay, there is a lot of tools to work with there in Malik Cunningham. You have to just have him get better in terms of reading defenses, making the best decisions, and continuing what he's been able to do at Louisville. Like I said, probability, it really kind of depends, because you have some big-time quarterbacks in this class. You have C.J. Stroud out of Ohio State. You have some other options that, you have Bryce Young from Alabama that you can look at. So it'll depend. But I do think that a solid solid season success for Malik Cunningham, which the Louisville Cardinals have some solid team success. Who knows what it might do for the the draft stock of Malik Cunningham. And then the new addition, Jermayne Lole. I think that having a force on the interior defensive line that can also rush the passer from the outside if need be, that versatility, overall just a big man, over 300 pounds. That's having a guy that can disrupt opposing run games. You see interior defensive linemen getting valued a ton in the NFL draft. Jordan Davis is a name that comes to mind. Devontae Wyatt, both first-round guys out of Georgia. We mentioned that on yesterday's episode when discussing the significance of addressing a key need in the the interior defensive line position. So a lot of that will be predicated on the success that Lole has this season. He's coming off of a season-ending injury. He has to learn, the new playbook and stuff like that. So I don't think it would be fair to probably put first-round expectations on the Lole this season. But I will say that if he does that, if he does turn in a good season with a solid bill of health, who knows? I mean, having a 6'2", 300-pound interior defensive lineman that's solid in rushing and passing defense, you never know. But ultimately, I think that Caleb Chandler, out of the three that I just mentioned, probably has the easiest path to getting to being a first-round selection. Two other guys, however, that are on the NFL draft radar that I think with a good season could rise up boards very quickly. That is both members of the Louisville Cardinals defense, Ketrel Clark and Yasir Abdullah. We will talk about what those two guys bring to the table in terms of scouting here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at BetOnline. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. As always, I want to take this time to thank each and every one of you for making Locked On Louisville your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So two guys that I believe that are really kind of flying under the radar in terms of the NFL draft for next season. One of them, Ketrel Clark, missed a decent chunk of the season at the end of the year with a injury, a torn ACL, I do believe. And Yasir Abdullah, frankly, he isn't getting the attention he deserves. Sorry. Excuse me. He's not getting the attention he deserves when it comes to some of the best overall pass rushers and outside linebackers. We'll first look at Kei'Trel Clark. Kei'Trel Clark last season, really, really solid numbers. A career high 40 tackles, and he didn't even play all 12 games. Had 3 interceptions, 9 pass deflections. Simply put, all throughout the season, didn't necessarily have a ton of didn't have a ton of action and guys going his way. That's where you kind of look at Ketrel Clark and you think, okay, well, he might not necessarily be a number one cornerback, but he has all of the traits to be one of a very, very solid starting cornerback in the league. 5'10", 180 pounds. So some will view him as a little undersized, but cornerbacks, he has a ton of athleticism, high points the football extremely well, and just overall his feel for the opposing quarterback's reads and stuff like that, reading quarterback's eyes and jumping routes. I think that he does a great job of contesting 50-50 balls, and just the press at the line of scrimmage, the release, and his coverage abilities. He is a very, very physical cornerback that I think it kind of makes up for maybe the lack of size. But Ketrel Clark's still not that small of a guy, 5'10", 180 pounds. Obviously, he may add a little bit of weight at the next level, but being 5'10", it's not like he is too small by any means. So I think with a solid season next year to where he maybe replicates what he did in 2021 early on, or even takes the next step forward, is he a day one pick? Probably not. But could he find himself in the round 2 to round 3 or round 2 to round 3 on day 2? I think it's definitely a possibility. I think that if he were to finish the season out the way he did this past year, with a clean bill of health, and maybe enter the draft of the Excuse me, I'm yawning all over the place. If he were to stay healthy and have replicated his production from the first part of the season into the second part of the season, and if he were to enter the draft last year, I think he's still maybe, after some good testing, been in a day 2 consideration. But I do think that this is a player that Louisville is going to look at like, okay, this guy definitely can get to the league. Now, regardless, I think he's going to get drafted. I think that he is definitely that talented. He's a number 1 cornerback in college. He's shown that. He's battled with some very, very solid receivers. Looked extremely good against Mississippi to start the year out. Looked solid against Central Florida a couple games after that. So he's gone up against some very, very solid wide receivers in college to where he's getting tested in the ACC. And a lot of opposing quarterbacks really aren't throwing his way because he's that good in coverage. So that's something to keep an eye out for. Yasir Abdullah, on the other hand, is one of the more underrated defenders in college football. Looked extremely incredible last year, had 10 sacks. The growth between 2020 to 2021 was immaculate. 61 tackles, which was very, very solid. Had 7 more sacks than his previous career high, forced a fumble last year, had 3 pass deflections, 6'1", 235-pound Miramar, Florida native. Ultimately, I think that what you're looking for as a pass rusher in the NFL, being strong enough to contend with opposing offensive linemen, but also being quick enough to get after the quarterback. Some people maybe say maybe he's a little undersized for his position. I think that he has the explosiveness, has a very, very solid first step in his pursuit. I mean, he is a heat-seeking missile. Just watching him get after the quarterback, I mean, he is really, really solid and shredding blocks, getting around the outside, getting that, the angle and the leverage that he has. At 6'1", I think it's a pretty solid size for an outside linebacker position. So, I mean, I do think that he could see a Ketrel Clark level rise if you were going to, talk about, the possibilities of, him staying fully healthy. Excuse me. This is 3 yawns. That's probably a career high. We're talking about career high in sacks. I had a career high 3 yawns, and we're not even through the second segment of the show. But I digress. I'm extremely excited for both of these guys. I think that this is, like I mentioned in the past segment, this is a money year for Malik Cunningham. Well, it's also a money year for a lot of these other guys. And just because I'm talking about only Ketrel Clark and Yasir Abdullah in the segment doesn't mean that there are other players that could really make themselves some money this year. Kendrick Duncan Jr. is one of those guys. Chandler Jones, moving on down the line. Jalen Mitchell. In the running back department, so on and so forth. Tyler Hudson, the list goes on, so on and so forth. So I do think that, solid off seasons and getting the production to where it's 4. It's 4 of them, if anybody's counting. But if they're able to see an uptick in their production, one thing about Ketrel Clark that I wouldn't say it concerns me, but I'm a little bit interested in it is where his health is at. I haven't heard a general update on like where he's at in his recovery. Is he going to be ready for the the beginning of the season? And if he is he going to be in a prestige shape, or is it going to take him a little while to get into that game form? Obviously, he hasn't been really doing much in terms of practicing and stuff like that. So I'm interested to see kind of how that works out. Yasir Abdullah, on the other hand, in terms of some of the Louisville defenders that have been slept on throughout the years, under the radar, just not appreciated. I mean, I think Yasir Abdullah was one of the best pass rushers in college football this past season. I mean, he had 10 sacks. Double-digit sacks is still remarkable in the college game. So, he's no Aiden Hutchinson or Trayvon Walker, being a top 3 pick. But I do think that you could see a day 2 grade for Yasir Abdullah. Could he sneak into day 1 like a Patrick Queen did from LSU when he got drafted by the Baltimore Ravens in 2020? I'm not necessarily sure. But I do think, he and Ketrel Clark we could be looking at, 2 possible second round or third round draft picks with solid seasons, of course. So, but that's all for that segment. Next segment, you all know, it's the weekly mailbag. We're going to dive into that here in just a second. If you're watching this, you won't necessarily see any advertisements or hear any of those. If you're listening, however, on any of the streaming services, you're going to hear some incorporated advertisements. So stay tuned for the next segment. But as always, I want to say thank you all. Again, I don't thank you enough for making this podcast, Locked On Louisville, your first listen every day. And for those who weren't aware, at the end of last week, the podcast surpassed 500 total subscribers on YouTube. I think we're up to 515 now. I am forever grateful for everyone for sharing, listening, subscribing, rating this podcast on whatever streaming service that they use, especially YouTube. It has been a blast. We are coming up closely on episode number 200, I believe, next month. So be sure to check that out. But as it pertains to the weekly mailbag segment, a couple of questions. The first one is pertaining to baseball. It says, with how you diagnosed where the team was at after the series about a month ago, are you still having the same doubts for the team? And if so, what needs to be done? I mean, still kind of the same kind of concerns. It's the lack of consistency for the pitching. I think that you know what you're going to get hitting the baseball. So pretty solid work there. But to be in line for a top 8 seed a year after you missed the NCAA tournament altogether, I mean, obviously you hope to, have good hitting and good pitching and the whole 9 yards. But I think the pitching is where, I've kind of identified it as sort of my area of concern, which a lot of fans would do. Next question is relating to football. Lole is not the only open scholarship. I think the team has 1 to 2 open spots. What spots, if any, do you think that this team would look to address? That's a good question. We're kind of in a spot now to where there's not many options out there, so I'm not sure if they fill these scholarships or if they just hold on to them for the next cycle. But if they were to add any type of players or anything like that, I think maybe you look at possibly adding another interior defensive lineman to go alongside Jermayne Lole. But honestly, wide receiver would probably be my bet. Losing a guy like Tyler Harrell, they may look to add a speed wide receiver to the mix, and excuse me. But even then, that is kind of up in the air because the statuses of Braden Smith and Devon Mortimer, who are both speed wide receivers, are kind of still up in the air. So who knows? But I'm very, very excited for this team moving forward with the addition of Jermayne Lole. All right, we'll see what we got here. Okay, let's see. Okay. This is a question I feel like I answer like once a week. Is there any new information on Tyrese Hunter? And if so, what is it? Tyrese, I think, made his visit to Texas, which I think was going to be his last visit. Hasn't committed anywhere to my knowledge. So maybe that means a lot for Louisville. I know that there have been kind of rumblings that maybe he visits the Cardinals program on his own dime. He's been here before to this team or to this university, I believe. So as far as me not necessarily having any type of recruiting information that I can give you, I apologize on that front. I will say the fact that he has not committed somewhere like Gonzaga, Kansas, or Texas, that does bode well. So moving on, kind of going into the football side of things. I'm sorry, I'm for some reason forgot to delete the questions from last week, so I'm still kind of looking back into what I was answering last week. Okay, how do you think that the work share is going to be divvied up in terms of the running back committee? That's a good question. I think you're going to see a lot like last season. It's going to be riding the hot hand. It's going to be about exploiting and utilizing matchups. Jalen Mitchell, Travion Cooley, and Tyon Evans are all going to get some solid work in the Louisville backfield. You're going to have some games where one running back gets over 20 carries. Evans will have a game with 20 carries. Travion Cooley with 20 carries, and then Jalen Mitchell with 20 carries. I think that if you made me pick who the opening game starter would be, I'm probably going to go Jalen Mitchell just because it seems like he was kind of the consistent running back from last year, and it may take Tyon Evans some time to get acclimated with the playbook and stuff like that, being a transfer and everything. So ultimately, it kind of depends, but I would assume it's probably something like last year to where you're seeing those three getting the majority of the carries, and then you have guys like Joar Jordan that may be involved more so in the passing game. So the last question pertains to the basketball side of things. I have a feeling that Jalen Withers is going to have a breakout season this year. Am I feeling too optimistic, or do you feel the same way? I'm in the same boat. I think that a solid offseason with Kenny Payne and Danny Manning is exactly what Jalen Withers needs. Some consistent coaching and being able to maximize his skill set in a certain role. So I'm excited for Jalen Withers in year 4 of the program. I think that we're going to see some of his best work yet. He has the skill set to be very successful here. It's just a matter of the coaching staff putting him in the right position to succeed, and what better coaching staff to do so than the tandem of Kenny Payne and Danny Manning, 2 former first-round NBA draft selections and NCAA champions. So Overall, great mailbag questions. As I mentioned, thank you goes out to everyone for sharing the podcast and listening, watching on any streaming service that they use. I want to give a shout out to the Locked On ACC podcast. 30 minutes a day of conference knowledge and content. No better place to get ACC news than the Locked On ACC podcast, hosted by Candace Cooper. 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. On today's show, talked about Malik Cunningham, Jermayne Lole, Caleb Chandler, and their cases for being a first-round pick in 2023. Also, Yasir Abdullah and Ketrel Clark being guys that could possibly raise their draft stock significantly for next season, while also diving into the weekly mailbag. Jeremy Wallman will be back on tomorrow's show, so be on the lookout for that. Going to be a lot of content as the month comes to a close. If you have any content ideas, feel free to reach out to the Twitter tag in the graphic below, and also the Locked On Twitter page at @LO_Louisville. But hey, that's going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.